Шановні гості, другий день другого українського жіночого конгресу.
Dear guests, the second day of the Second Women's Congress is opened. Let us welcome all of the participants. And today we start with open talks about the specifics of national stereotypes about women and men. Please have a look at the screen. So, what are they going to say if I'm going to take care of my children? I'm working. Why should I need a man who is going to cook borscht? Because the man has to work. Almost 70% of men and women who participated in exit polls decided that the women's best role is to take care of children and to cook food. What does it mean to be the real man? To make money, to know how to hit the nail, to protect your wife, or probably to cook breakfast and to help bring up the child. What does it mean to be a real woman? Everything is okay in your house, you look perfect, or you do all the physical job as man does, to know about technology and cars, to make money. Everything depends on your values that are dominating our society, and the material condition of the family, the responsibility of both in the marriage, responsible partnership and parenthood, daily errands, is the duty for every family member regardless of the gender. What should we do to promote these gender values? And the conservative values would become a history. Let me welcome the moderator of Open Talks, Ms. Olesia Żulińska, Public Affairs and Communication Manager, Coca-Cola Ukraine. Let me invite speakers, Her Excellency Marie Yovanovich, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the US. Her Excellency Judith Koff, Ambassador of the United Kingdom of Ukraine. Martin Häggström, Ambassador of Sweden to Ukraine. Marius Yanukovis, Ambassador of the Republic of Lithuania to Ukraine. Silvia Josefina Cortés Martin, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of Spain to Ukraine. Maria Cristina Serpa de Almeida, Ambassador of Portugal to Ukraine. Ole Terje Hoppestad, Ambassador of Norway to Ukraine. Hello, everyone, and thank you for this fantastic.
If you okay, please take your. I'm probably the luckiest person in this hall because I have the more gender equal panel. I have women and men representing. I'm not counting myself, representing the very important. Positions, diplomats. They represent their countries, they share their experience, and I really hope that after this hour we will learn more as Ukrainians from the experience of other countries. So we've seen the video, but I have the question, have you seen the movie, probably my favorite one, Suffragette? You know, this is a movie which I'm starting to cry like from the very first moment. And I'm still thinking how much efforts women, even 100 years ago, put to gain what we have now, which we think is granted, which we do not value. And, but it was a hard fight to get the right to vote, to be protected, to be equal, to take the position. Some of the positions are still hard for Ukrainian women to hold. And so this experience is unique, and now, having such a representative of such important countries, I have a lot of questions, but probably to start with, I will start from Ms. Ambassador Goff, because your experience and my favorite movie is about your country. There is something, you know, the stereotypes the change of the mindset. All of this country has been through a lot of changes. We are only in the beginning. Ukrainian women, we still see the data shows that we still have a lot to do to change the opinion towards women in this country. So what is your experience? How you feel from your history and from your experience we need to do first to change this public opinion about the women?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very glad to be here today at this event. This is, I think, an honor to me.
Today morning, and I'm still getting with it. Like all good women, I've been multitasking. This is actually my second speech this morning. So I think that's part of our success. You're actually, embarrassingly, asking me about a film that I haven't yet seen.
Sorry.
However, it is British filmmaking at its best, and I know that it catalogues very, very well the very genuine struggle that the suffragettes had over 100 years ago. And this year in the United Kingdom marks the 100th anniversary of women actually gaining the right to vote. That struggle was very hard fought for. The women resorted to acts of violence. Some of them paid the ultimate price and sacrificed their own lives. Some of them were force-fed and subject to very degrading and repulsive treatment by the British authorities at the time. But they continued to struggle and ultimately prevailed. I think in some ways, our experience may be useful to Ukraine. Views in the United Kingdom at that particular time were really stacked against women. Women were meant to be in the home, women were meant to be carers, nurturers, bringing up children. A lot of that changed during the First World War. The men were gone. The men were fighting overseas. Over a million of them didn't come back. We lost a generation of men. And what that meant was that women, for the first time, had to step into roles that weren't typically viewed as feminine or right for women to do. And I think a couple of things. First is they actually quite enjoyed it. They had a purpose. It was actually something different. It was much more interesting and rewarding often to do those tasks, even if it was working in dangerous munitions factories or ploughing the land, than perhaps what they'd been doing before. And I think secondly, when the war was over, they had been emboldened and given confidence and courage to say, actually, we want to play a greater role in society and in the world around us and what shapes us. As I said, a lot of the men didn't come back, so a lot of the women were able to maintain those activities. Others, of course, came back and found it not so easy. I think there was a real shake-up between men coming back and finding that the home front had changed. Women had changed. They were struggling to fit back into their roles. Fast forward another 30-odd years, we had the Second World War in a similar scenario. I was reading very recently in the British press about a woman who died, about 96. She had been a pilot during the Second World War. Now, as a woman, she wasn't allowed to fly to the front line. Her job was to deliver planes up and down the country to where they were needed. She could fly every single military plane in the United Kingdom, whether it be a Spitfire or a Lancaster bomber. Her work was vital to the UK during a time of very hard warfare. Her accounts of the time are hilarious. The plane arrives, the men go up to receive the plane, and out comes a small woman who does not look as if she should have been flying that plane. But without those efforts, and without, I think, that backdrop of conflict, we would not have changed. And the reason I say that is Ukraine finds itself in a period of conflict right now. And actually, you can't afford to be picky and choosy about whether that person has a certain set of chromosomes or doesn't. Actually, everybody has a role to play in defending their country, building their country, particularly when over half of your population is female. You can't afford to dismiss it and cast it away. And I think, from my perspective in the United Kingdom, we have come an awful long way from the time where women did not have the vote and did not have equal recognition. We're not perfect. If I look at the statistics at the moment, the Parliament in the United Kingdom, only 32% of our MPs are women. That's still not good enough. It depends which some parties are better than others. They know which ones they are, but that's still not good enough. If you look at the FTSE 100, and this is a horrifying statistic, the FTSE 100, that's the 100 companies in Britain, the largest listed on the London Stock Exchange, there are more companies led by men called Dave than there are companies led by women. So I think I'm not sitting here today saying that we are a paragon of virtue, but I think what we are doing as a nation is understanding that we still have some way to go, that we need to improve and change mentalities. I think, and that starts at a very, very young age. So government policies, we are looking, for example, and we are exposing disparities in pay in companies. It's very, very clear that in the United Kingdom, women are often paid less for the same job than men. We're exposing that. We have passed legislation to do that, and we are now shining a light on that type of inequality. But I do think it comes very much down to how we encourage our children, and that's where I have seen the greatest shift. I have a small son here in Kiev, and he came home from school the other day and said, "Mummy, boys aren't allowed to cry, are they?" I said, "Well, hang on a minute. Yes, you're 5, you can cry if it hurts, if you don't like something." And I think what we tell our children about how they can act and what emotions and reactions and behavior is male, masculine, or female, or feminine shapes a generation to come. And I think that's where we've seen the biggest shift that over recent years in the United Kingdom, where we're being very clear with our children that if you are a girl and want to be an engineer, you can be an engineer. If you're a boy and want to go and be a ballet dancer, that's a bad choice in this part of the world, I realize that, because you're far ahead of us on that one, but that we don't shut down options. When I was a young girl and studying French and German, I was told I could do 2 things. I could either be an air stewardess or I could be an interpreter. And I thought, air stewardess. Like travel, don't like serving drinks, not very good at it. Interpreter, yes, but what about actually being the person who's on the stage and saying those words in the first place? I can remember the boys in my class being told that they could be pilots and prime ministers and politicians. What does that do to the confidence of your children? So I think for us, that was my childhood back in the 1970s. I was lucky enough to have parents that did encourage me and looked past that. But I think we owe it to this generation of children, and I think that's, as I say, one of the biggest shifts in the United Kingdom, to encourage them and give them the confidence that gender actually does not matter and does not define you in the way that it has in previous decades.
Thank you, and continue. And continue in the trend of education. While I was preparing for this panel, I read a lot about the changes in American education, about that now there is a lot of attention to promote in the schools the girls, to give them opportunity to learn mathematics, to be engineers, to take the perceived men positions. And in this regard, I want to ask to representative of Scandinavian countries, because your gender gap is far from us to get. So in your countries, men are allowed to cry, men are allowed to go on the pregnancy leave, your men are easy with accepting the roles of women. And I have the questions to Mr. Hagström and to Mr. Hopsters about your countries, how you manage to change this mindset of women and of men and education, how you manage to do it so that you now have a 0 gender gap or close to 0.
Thank you for that question. it's not, unfortunately, it's not true that we have a zero gender gap. We still have also a gender gap in many different areas. It's a good question. I think many of the things that Judith said are similar, I think, in the development of Sweden. Of course, this has been a very long process. Of course, very important has been very strong women's movement, very strong, very tough debates, also on voting rights, for example. Although when I studied for this panel, I actually found out that we had universal voting rights already in the 18th century in Sweden, but it was limited only to people of a certain income, so it was not universal, but it was both for women and men. So apparently there may be something cultural there also back in history. I think another thing that has been in more recent times after the Second World War very important is important cultural figures. And one that I would like to mention in particular, because she is famous also in Ukraine, is Astrid Lindgren, who in Sweden is most famous for writing about Pippi Longstocking, who is really a kind of role model for a very, very independent-minded girl and women. And I think this has been, you talked about school education, I think these are books that we read in schools. These are kind of attitudes that are discussed in schools, and the importance for children to have the right to be independent, to decide for themselves, well, children, of course, to a certain extent, but still, this is I think, very important. And of course, the most important role model for this is a girl. And I think all Swedish girls, and probably also most Swedish boys, they go through a Pippi phase where they would like to dress up like Pippi and be like Pippi. And I think this should not be underestimated, because of course after that, after I had my Pippi phase, I became a grown-up and started to to act sometimes like Pippi Longstocking, but I'm not as strong as her, unfortunately. Yeah, there are photos. Yes. No, but I think the most important, and this is where I think also this is relevant in Ukraine, I think, is the economic side as well. Just like in the UK, in Sweden, this was very much linked to very strong economic development in Sweden in the 1960s and 70s. And we run into a situation where we had a lack of workforce. Then it was realized that we had around 50% of the population that was not really in the workforce, the women, because at that time most women were at home in Sweden. So that led to a very strong shift in policy, where there was kindergartens, care for the elderly, changes in tax legislation. We went from family unit legislation to individual legislation to encourage women to enter the workforce. And this was very, very efficient policy. Most women entered the workforce. And that over time, so like it started very much, okay, we had the women's movement, we had the strong debates, but what really changed the society was, I think, when this economic shift happened. And following that, there was a shift in politics. Now, we don't have gender quotas by law, but most parties decide on their own to introduce quotas in their party lists. In the parliament that was elected on the 9th of September, we have 47% women. Since these voluntary quotas were introduced in 1994, we have never had under 40% women in parliament.
Bravo. Seriously, bravo.
But I think this also, of course, this changed the perception of women and men, because we have many women leaders, lots of women in parliament. Also since the 90s, half of the ministers have always been men and half have been women. One last point that I wanted to make, because I think somewhere here you have this exhibition about Swedish dads. And I think paternity leave has been a really, really important also for changing stereotypes, for changing the culture. Nowadays, Swedish dads take on an average 90 days of paternity leave. That means that women still take more. But there is a steady growth of the percentage that is taken by men. And of course, this also means that men become much more involved. They are very much part, exactly that was shown in this picture. That is very natural. It's actually, if you're a man and you're not taking your paternity leave, you will get a lot of questions. People will wonder, what kind of man are you not to take your paternity leave?
Yesterday we had one representative Ukrainian guy who lives in Sweden and who told us this story. And everybody was shocked, I think, here,
No, but
to hear this.
This is true. And this is also something that happened in the previous generation. My mother and father were both also home with me when I was a kid. So of course, but it's this kind of evolutionary, steady change of this situation from this. But I recommend you very much, maybe I will stop there, and to have a look at this exhibition. I think there are also Swedish and Ukrainian dads. Yeah.
Yes.
So it's a very nice, good exhibition. So please have a look at it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, Norway, Ambassador Hopstad, please tell us how's everything is going in your country. You're also Scandinavian, representing the Scandinavian country, and we all jealous, women I mean, that you have such a absolutely different mindset and opinion towards women and towards men in your country.
Dobrý ránok, děkuji za zapýtání.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the question and for the invitation.
Ukrainian now.
Дуже радий взяти участь.
I'm glad to participate in this event, in this conference, and for the things that we can have support the gender equality in Ukraine. In English, so I will talk in English, if you please.
Yes, I would say that this has been, like in Sweden and Great Britain and other ways, a long process. It has changed a lot in my lifetime. Like my parents' generation, my mother was at home with the children, my father was working, he was the breadwinner of the family. That was a normal situation back then. And actually, my mother tells me that when she was starting to work, when my youngest brother was 9 years old, he was already old enough to more or less take care of himself, or at least by his elder brothers. She was actually criticized by some of the neighbors who said that, why are you going to work? Why? So this was, back then, it was kind of, in a way, prestigious to be a housewife and for the man to be the sole breadwinner of the family. This has changed dramatically. It's 100% or 180% now. Now women and men are participating equally, I would say more or less equally, in work life. If we talk about politics, if we look back to the 1970s, politics was completely male-dominated. If you look at old political debates on television in Norway, you had a lot of men in suits and smoking in the studio and discussing serious things like women's situation and things like that, with no women present. So that was the typical situation. But this changed gradually through the 1970s and 1980s. And I think what was very important in our country was very strong women politicians. You might have heard about Gro Harlem Brundtland, maybe. She was the first woman prime minister in Norway in 1981. And she was a fantastic role model for women in Norway. Her first government in 1981 had almost 50% women. 8 out of 18 cabinet members were women, which was at the time quite radical. But it opened doors. It showed talented women that, yes, politics is an arena where we can also play a part. It's not only a arena for men. So gradually this changed, and now we have a government with a woman prime minister, also a foreign minister, finance minister, and all the party leaders, practically most of the party leaders are women in Norway now. So 50-50 in the government, almost 50-50 in parliament. So from being, so to speak, ruled by men back in the 60s, 70s, now we are ruled by women, one might say, almost in Norway.
Congratulations.
And that's, that feels good, yeah. But I think role models are important not only in politics, but also in other parts of society, like in sports, for instance. We had, back in the 70s, it was common knowledge that it would be dangerous for women to run more than 3,000 meters because that would harm the body and the organism. Then we had a woman called Grete Waitz, who won the New York Marathon 9 times between 1978 and 1988. She showed the way that also in sports, women and men are equal and can exploit the same possibilities. But still, in Norway, I would say it's not perfect, not at all. We still have stereotypes, and it's still not easy for women always to enter into what some people would define as a man's world. Let's take soccer as one example. Now the Soccer World Cup this summer, we had a former professional soccer player, woman, as an expert commentator in the Norwegian television. And she was very good, very clever, and very insightful in soccer. But you know, in the social media, the comment fields, they were so full of negative comments, even hateful comments towards this woman commenting on soccer, which is kind of a male-dominated sport, right? So still in Norway, we have to fight with these stereotypes. When it comes to participation in the work life, we have the same story, I think, as Sweden, with the economic rise in Norway through the 70s and 80s, which made it possible to also create maternity and paternity leave. Now we have 14 weeks of mandatory paternity leave in Norway, which is taken by most people, and I think the attitude is that you are supposed to take this, and it gives men a much bigger role and much more present role in family life. So why should only women be at home with a sick child? Why not the father? The women's work is just as important as the man's work. So this is a very positive thing. Also another thing which has changed maybe the attitudes towards women or girls and boys is also the compulsory military service, which is now also equal since 3-4 years ago. And now about 1/3 of the soldiers who make the compulsory military service are women. And it's not only that there are boys and girls, but they also actually have we have gender-neutral quarters or barracks, which is also seems to be a good experience with that, because it kind of actually reduces the risk of sexual harassment, and it creates the image of a soldier not being a tough man or something like that, but a soldier is a person with both masculine and feminine and characteristics. So this is also another example. Yeah. Yeah, I think I will stop there. I can answer other questions later on, but that's for the start at least.
So we've talked a little bit about economic empowerment, and this is something is very important, and it's top of agenda because we all know that women are the force for economic change in the world. The data shows this. It confirms this. We yesterday talked a lot about women being able to return more credits to the banks than men. Women are more responsible, how to say it, and it's observed and monitored for the last 20 years. So I have questions to Ambassador Cordes Martin and to Ambassador Sarpa de Almeida about I do understand that the gender is the top on agenda, but what is your leaders are doing, what they are taking, and what measures in your countries are to make those women stronger, and how to overcome the stereotype that women are not a good leader in the business?
Okay, thank you very much. I saw you put us both Southerners together and both Northerners together. Maybe that's the first stereotype, I have to say.
Exactly.
I was commenting, I mean, she gave me the idea, so I'm going to steal it from you, but then you can repeat it. Is that, in general, in Europe, I'm talking now about the European Union member countries, southern countries, and especially Spain and Portugal, and I would refer only to Spain, maybe because we had also an authoritarian regime for 40 years, and we were a little bit backwards in the terms of the rights of women. We are supposed to be now also backwards in the treatment of women. And I'm not going to enter into a debate with my friends and colleagues from the north, but I think that's a pure stereotype, which, I mean, the figures show that in the southern countries, and I'm talking about Spain, for instance, we have now 50% women in government, we have 40% women in parliament, and we have 30-something% women at the top of the highest, of the best and most and biggest and successful companies. No, don't applaud, because figures are figures which show a reality, but I would say, and that's a critic to, I'm not going to say to my government or my governments, because I'm an ambassador, but it's quite easy to say, let's put 50% of women in parliament. I mean, you could do it either compulsory, saying in the electoral law that political parties have to do that. We haven't done that in Spain. It's more a free decision of the political parties to do it, and they do it either by writings, like some parties that they establish in their statutes that 50% of the candidates in the list have to be women. Sometimes even they have to be, I don't know the term in English, but it's like a zip list. So men, woman, blah, blah. And a number of constituencies have to be, the number one has to be a woman. So they, but also because they know that they would get, that it's good, that they would answer to an electoral demand, so they do it freely. I think it's also easy for a government to say, I will take 50% of the, what is more difficult, and I think that's the key, is the education and the change of mentalities. I mean, of course, for instance, there was, as I think it was Judith who said, that there were professions which also in Spain were closed to men. Closed also by free will of the woman, if you can call that a free will, in the sense that it would be normal that a woman would want to become a teacher, but not an engineer, for instance. And in Spain, what has been done in the probably 20 years, the last 20 years, is more a personal endeavor of the women leaders in education, in politics, in scientific research, in economics, to reach out to the schools, to talk to the girls, to give this as an example. I mean, this is a very long-term process, but for a child, when they see a woman ambassador, and they see a woman speaker of parliament, a woman President of the United States. I don't know. I mean, when they see this, for them, they realize, why can I do that? And that's because, of course, if we complain about the fact that there are few women engineers, you cannot force a girl to become an engineer. I mean, there is the freedom, this principle concept, which is at the root of all our systems that has to apply. So you cannot force women, children to become, for instance, we complain in my diplomatic service that we have few ambassadors or few director generals. But the truth is that if we are only 27% of women diplomats, we are 25% women director generals. So you would see it's fair. What we want is that more women join the Foreign Service. But of course you cannot force them. Of course you have to adapt the system as far as possible so as to make it attractive for a woman to be traveling around. So you have to reconcile with the children, you have to give these kind of opportunities. But once in a state as ours, full-fledged democracies, full-fledged rule of law systems, you have established the principle that nobody can be discriminated because of sex, religion, etc., that there is freedom to choose and to establish your own future. What you have to get is first the legal framework, which of course does not discriminate at all in terms of opportunities, of salaries. Another question is the salary gap. That's another issue which is extremely important. But then what you have to do is to give the woman the opportunity to take advantage of all their possibilities. And sorry, I deviated a little bit from your question, but I really don't know whether we are more, we take care more of money, we are more sensible in administering. I would, as a traditional, and I say traditional feminist, I think we take better care of this. I don't know why, but I think it's true. But I don't know, I've seen my mother, maybe, and that's a little bit going back, they were so used to administer the domestic economy that maybe they apply the same principles that of not spending more than what we get, basic economic rules that can be applied also to the big companies. But I cannot comment on that very well. But it's true that, for instance, in the case of Spain, in our foreign policy and the foreign aid that our ministry gives mostly to South American countries, there was some 15 years ago, they did a pilot project giving microcredits only to women, and it was extremely successful. And sorry for the men of these countries, but it was really extremely successful. And now this system was applied voluntarily, of course, by private banks within Spain, not only for the foreign policy, to give this kind of microcredits, especially when Spain last time suffered a big economic crisis in 2008, and there was an enormous unemployment rate in Spain. And so they established, copying it from the success that we had in South America. But, well, maybe I'm a fanatic of education, but I think that's something that here in this country, where probably many women, many young women and many girls do not even think of having a university degree, of becoming good doctors, engineers, politicians, etc. Maybe that's something which we as ambassadors, but also politicians present here or other leaders can do to reach out to these schools and show to them that if they want, they can do it. Thank you.
Exceptional advice. Thank you very much. Do you have a mic? Do you have mic? Do you have mic?
Okay, I want to pick up again. We are also a rather conservative country, but we have changed a lot. We have changed a lot in these last 40 years. But even before, even conservative, I've got to point out something for you. My mother has been working till she was 70, and she didn't know how to cook. And my father was a better cook than her. So, stereotypes, forget them a bit. So, we also had a revolution in the 70s, and we picked up where the northern countries were at the same time. And so we have changed it even more dramatically that they have changed. And you can find now that we are in a different process. We are not looking just only about women in power, but gender equality. And gender equality means everything. It's women working, women empowerment, but also men and women in the process of politics. We have 35% of MPs. We have six. There's one party that has only one deputy. So let's skip this one. We have 5 in 2, and in this political spectrum, we have in the right, we have a woman, head of party. And in the left, we have a woman, also head of the party. The most tough people in the parliament are women, young women. We have quite a rejuvenated parliament. So let's skip out parliament. Let's go to government. We are also around 30% of women in parliament. But we have fought and we have chosen also to look at women, but also on other parts. We have, for example, our Prime Minister is a man, of course, now. But we had a woman as Prime Minister in the end of the it was in 79, 80. And she was Prime Minister, and she was fantastic. She fought so much for gender equality. And our Prime Minister is racially is half European, half Indian. It's our Prime Minister. Our Minister of Justice is a woman. Okay, she's a public prosecutor by background. But she has also something else. She's black. And we have a vice minister also for disabilities. And she's blind, and she's so tough. And so we have been trying to force very much on this issue. And that's very important. But there are also now some other issues that we are forcing. We had voluntary paternity leave, and not too many men used to take it, around 20%. So now it's compulsory. They need to go. And we are expecting this to change, because this is rather, it has been this year, so we will need to figure out. But we have also more important things to think about. And one of the things that we are now looking at very carefully, as we are one of the first ratifiers of the Istanbul Convention, we are thinking that we need to look carefully about domestic violence. This is also a point that we want to get rid of. And this is a point that everybody over there in Portugal is trying to figure out how to get rid of it. we are a very Catholic country. We are very open-minded, but we are a very Catholic country, Spain. But our hierarchy, we follow what the Pope Francis has said. We need to touch these matters, and we are trying very hard. And why do I speak about this? Because unfortunately, we have here a Portuguese lady that has been complaining to us that a Ukrainian husband beats her. And it has been this week. And I've been trying to get her out of here. And so it's something that it takes me now, it's one of the most important things that I have in hand. So I want to say, this is important. I want also to say something else. I do see a huge crowd of people here, but mostly women. It should not be like so. It should be far more men here than they are here. So, as a conservative country, we are very upfront, and we try very much to be. Let's talk about a bit numbers. We have quite a lot of people, in effect, in the medical corps. We have not too many women diplomats, but because they don't want to get in, maybe. They stay somewhere else. They go to the judiciary part. We have 60% of judges that are women, 65% public prosecutors. So we are very much upfront in this part, and maybe not so much engineers. Okay, maybe. But it's more on the IT that we are trying to force them to go into. Because the others, they go. They prefer other things, maybe. Okay, it's up to them. We can't force them. But we also think that there is a need to point some details that still we are missing. We have, for example, in the army, we have a voluntary army. We started to bring women into the army in the 88. And in the 90s, they could really be in there. So we have now around 15% of women in all three branches. We have even women in the submarine corps, which is so dreadful to be. And we have rather a percentage of women in the police force. It should be more. We have also women quite a lot more in the National Guard, the equivalent of what you have. And so we have been trying to move and forget prejudice, forget what we have maybe thought 50 years ago. It's in the past. That's what is our aim, actually, to move forward all the time.
Thank you. When I hear such data, I'm all the time impressed how much we're not aware of other countries. And that's a lot for us to learn, for Ukrainians. And I just want to give the floor to Ambassador Ivanovic. As actually US, of course, is an exemplary country of democratic rights. And you have your, I think it should be working, yeah. And your last election demonstrated that. You have a lot of women now. But is there are a lot of history behind and a lot of fight as well behind that. Can you share something which you are proud of and what is your opinion that we can learn or steal from US to our country, to our reality?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and thanks for having us all here today. You know, one of my most memorable moments here in Ukraine has to do with the issue of gender. We have a family at the U.S. Embassy, and I had done an event with all of the families, and one family had a little boy, and he went home, and they were sitting around at dinner, and this little boy, who's about 7 years old, he was very thoughtful, and he asked his parents, "So, do you think that men can become ambassadors too?" And, you know, I mean, for me, that is such a moment because, you know, I look at this panel and it turns out men can be ambassadors too, but so can women. And I think that you know, kind of goes to the point that Judith was making about how we teach our children, more formal education that you were making. I think all of this is really important. And I think back to the beginning of my career, not quite the beginning, but when I was sort of a middle manager, and again, with an embassy family, I met the family, and the husband in this family worked for me. And his daughter was there. She too was about 7 years old at the time. And he introduced me to her and said, "This is my boss." And I could see the look on her face. You know, how can you, a woman, be my dad's boss? You know, going from that to can men become ambassadors? Can boys become ambassadors? Is really, I think, in the span that's in the span of 15 or 16 years. And so I think we have come a very long way in the United States, and I think, you know, throughout the world, as all of you know, the panelists have been noting. It is not even 100 years that women in America have the right to vote. Next year will mark 100 years that we passed an amendment to our Constitution allowing women to vote. But as you know, pretty much everybody has said, there's the formal, you know, there are laws and various other things, but what is really more important is the informal understanding and the expectations in society of both women, but also, you know, men. Of what is important, and that everybody needs to participate in society, in government, in the economy, for our countries to be able to reap the full benefit of all of our citizens. As you noticed, in November, we really had a moment in U.S. electoral history where 112 women were elected to the House of Representatives. But that only means that we now have approximately 25% women in our House of Representatives. So we have come, and the other thing I should note about that, 112 women, and they, along with their male colleagues who were elected, represent, you know, all of the shades of humanity. I think that is an important thing too. It's important that we draw on both genders in order for our societies to be as successful as possible. It is important that we draw on everybody, no matter what your race or religion is, because everybody has something to contribute. So I think that's really important. One thing that I wanted to note is that while, you know, all of our societies have, I would say, sometimes formal, sometimes informal barriers to women fully participating, whether it's in government or in other parts of society. But we have choices too. And I think that's really important, that we're not just people who you know, wait, and I think everybody has noted that. We can take charge of our own lives as well. And there's a book in the United States called, that was published several years ago, called Lean In. And the concept of that book is that all of us can kind of lean into our work, lean into our families, that we can make choices. Those choices will be different at different times in our lives. And one of the examples that Sheryl Sandberg, the author of this book, gives is being at a meeting. So who in this room has been in a meeting where at the table are seated all men, and women, all the women are seated in the seat behind? So can I see a show of hands? Who has had that experience? Well, okay, so that's, obviously you guys are doing better on this in Ukraine than we are in the United States. I saw like maybe 10% of the hands go up. But at least in the United States, it's very common for the men to be seated at the table, women to be seated behind them. Even if the men are very junior, they just assume that they have a seat at the table because they have important stuff to say, even if they're junior, even if they don't know, frankly, what they're talking about. But they're men, and so of course, what they say must be worthwhile. And the premise of this book is that women shouldn't wait to be invited. If you're in the room, if somebody thought that you were important enough, had something to contribute, that you're in that meeting, sit at the table. Don't wait to be invited. And I think that's an important, I mean, it's kind of a simple concept, and sometimes it's hard to, you know, just put yourself at that table, speak up even if you're a little nervous. But I think it's important because we can affect, you know, not only the question at hand, but moving forward, women in a way that allows your enterprise, whatever it might be, to take full advantage of all of the talent in the room, not just the male part of the room. So I just want to close by noting that, as some of you may know, I was here from 2001 to 2004. And that was, you know, an amazing time for Ukraine. It was an amazing time for me. It's why I came back in 2016. And when I was here before, basically everybody I dealt with was male. And, you know, fast forward to 2016 when I returned, and it's about half and half. And these, okay, so there's some doubt. There's some doubt. But I would tell you that there is a good percentage of the people that I deal with who are female and who are in positions of responsibility. And I'm looking at some of them now. And so, you know, I think it's important as we talk about where we are right now and all of the things that still need to be done to have gender equality. I think it's also important to remember that whether it's in the US or in Ukraine, we've actually come a fairly long way, including in my professional lifetime. And I find that really inspiring. And when I look out at this room, it's true, it's mostly women, although we celebrate the men who are here. Thank you for being here and being supportive. I think the point is that there are a lot more women who are leaning in Ukraine, and I think that's important because not only are you contributing right now to making Ukraine a better place, which is super important at this critical and very challenging time in Ukraine's history, but you are setting the tone for your daughters, and some of them are here today, and your sons. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I will remember forever the story about the son. I have two now. I need to also think. Oh, definitely they should. And I have the question to Ambassador Inokanis. Why I asked you to be the last is because we, Ukraine and your country, been occupied by quite a lot period of time by Soviets. And we have a lot of in common in the public opinion, which was formed in that period of time. Of course, we had an honor yesterday to greet your president here, and I'm personally very jealous, really jealous, because I cried yesterday when she talked, and of course, but we now, as Ambassador Govtov, we have no choice. We need to change. We seriously need to overcome our past. We need to change. But probably there is some experience that you have that helped you to change quicker, to have such a leader, and to set the tone and change the public opinion. Sorry for such a long introduction.
Доброго ранку.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very glad to be here and to speak to these people and from this stage when our president Grybauskaite yesterday spoke.
Woman president already says a lot. And she told us yesterday that she got a question in a school from a girl who will be the next woman president in Lithuania. Not just president, but woman president. So that shows expectations of the society. Indeed, we had in this and previous governments many women ministers, women as a speaker, and so on and so on. So there are clear achievements, of course, if we speak about women's participation in the politics, but still, I would call our country in transition. You mentioned that of course all our countries have our own historic experiences, and we have 50 years of the Soviet occupation, and indeed the role of a woman in the Soviet system was very clearly defined. And of course we had to change our mentality and change our approach to this issue. We are lucky to have neighbors also on the stage, Scandinavian countries, Nordic countries, from which we learned a lot. I remember in early 90s I was walking on the street in Norway, I think, and I saw a situation when a man was carrying one small child on his hands, two other small childs were around him. In the other hand, he had a big shopping basket, and a woman was walking separately, just very relaxed. And I thought it was incredible. I mean, I thought it's absolutely impossible situation in Lithuania. So I understood how far away those countries are from us, and indeed a lot of changed with the European integration. When we became members of the EU, it changed our perception, and of course we were able to introduce good practices. We have even the European Institute of Gender Equality in Vilnius. Of course, all the formal legislation is in place, and the formal side is nice, but I think we are still suffering from a dual approach. So there are I think the biggest achievement in our case is that there is no more psychological and physical barriers for women to take any political post, to engage in any economic activities, so that is clear. But still, there is a certain pressure from the society to do most of the family work. And this is the situation we have, and despite the president and other prominent women, we have 24% women in the parliament. We have now only few women as ministers. So there is a room for improvement, and probably we spoke about some stereotypes, about some European stereotypes, that there are differences in the north and the south. I think it's partly true, because we know that, for example, Italy in the gender equality index is doing very well. We heard positive examples also from Spain and Portugal. And I can repeat what I said, and also I think this is also a suggestion for Ukraine. Every European experience is valuable and positive, so the more you have Europe at home in Ukraine. So I think the situation with the gender equality will change, and also the leadership is very important, both of men and women. But by closing, I would like to say that we are learning a lot, not only from our European partners, but from Ukraine as well. And also in this room, there are lots of women who successfully combine political job, business activities, and also act as volunteers, helping to the Ukrainian army, helping to the victims of the conflict in the East. And that's a unique experience, I would say, we have in Europe, and we really have to learn a lot from you.
Thank you very much. Gender equality is the terms we discussed yesterday, which mean given the opportunity to access and to have the job and have a choice. So you actually answered most of my questions. So about education, about the experience and everything what we can learn. But now I think that it's a time to give the opportunity to our audience to ask questions, so that I would not be the one who tortures you with a question.
No? Oh. Good morning, everybody. My name is Hanna Dovdenko. I'm rector of Vinnytsia Institute, University, Ukraine, but I'm also a member, a deputy of Vinnytsia City Council. And I worry a little bit, and I wrote what I want to ask you. So I would like to address you all with the following situation. Recently, more than 30 councils of different levels in Ukraine have adopted an appeal to public opinion on behalf of those councils about advocacy of traditional family values and against gender issues. And unfortunately, my Vinnytsia City Council was also one of them. And I know that this question now is being pushed in Ukraine, so more and more councils in Ukraine adopt it and vote for it. So the tendency is obvious. Someone in Ukraine is trying to aggravate the gender issues, and this someone is doing this with the help, very often with the help of church and religious. And as if the gender issues are against family values, which is not true. Of course, to my mind, these gender issues, gender equality issues, are connected with Ukrainian way to European values. And we all know who this someone is. So my question to you all is, what would you recommend to us? What is your opinion about this, and what we could do, someone to solve the situation? Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a very good question and a very current question. And I think there are a couple of things going on here. One is a genuine nervousness on parts of certain sectors of society about what does greater equality for women mean. And I think we have to understand those concerns and talk to those people, because I think we need to unpack it for them a little. I think there's also some propaganda, and we know where it's coming from, that is more about preventing Ukraine moving closer to Europe and using gender and other issues as an instrument to prevent you going there. Conversations about gender equality, gay roper, how terribly depraved all of us Europeans are, if only. But I think the key point really is actually about language. I think the term gender has now become very toxic in a number of places. And I am not sure that that is now the right way into the debate. In conversations that I have in this country, if you talk about equality for all, equality of opportunity for all, that isn't a difficult conversation to have. Would you like your daughters to have equality of opportunity? Would you like them to have the ability to go out there and achieve? That's not a hard conversation, but I think the minute you throw the word gender in, because it has become so instrumentalized, I think it's problematic. So my recommendation would be to think about the language that is being used and to look at a different way into the conversation. And I think it's also important to have the conversations, but talk about it in terms of opportunity and equality, rather than there is a sense of limiting others' rights, if you like. We've been through this in the UK. Feminism became a very, very dirty word. It's still tarnished to a certain extent. But again, if you talk about it differently, I think you get a better conversation and a better outcome. But I think it is also important to reach out to the church and engage with the church. They have a view. But Christian values are, of course, also about providing the same opportunity to all and understanding to all. So I think there is a very useful discussion to be had there, as indeed we have had in the United Kingdom. And we have come a long way. If I look at the church in the United Kingdom, when I was a child, I don't remember there being female bishops, priests. We now have them. And you can see that that change has come even in the most conservative of institutions, but it takes time.
Anybody else want to? Okay.
Добрий день. Ну, тепер треба буде вдягнути.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I think you put your headphones on for the translation. I would like to support Olesya. Wait a moment, please. So I would like to support Olesya, who figure out such kind of how to involve all the ambassadors, because your panel, I think this is the biggest inspiring discussion panel for all of the Congress participants, because Mr. and Mrs. Ambassadors. So I sought after the women's question to take part in this. And Olesya started with the movie Suffragette. I think that there are a lot of cinema which can give us faith and inspiration. And not to hurt our friends from Sweden, I would like to address my question to Mrs. Ambassador of the United States of America, because yesterday we started our day with an American speech. Would each of you like to say it? Can I give you an example, a book, a movie, a prominent person from your country to whom you would like us to find out more, or during this year to present the book to the participants of the Congress to support the idea to develop and to push forward, as it is done in your speeches about our children, our daughters. I would like you to name these books or these films, and I can start this as Olesya did. I can recommend the movie with Kevin Costner, Hidden Figures. I was crying for 3 times during this movie. And I think our Deputy Prime Minister Zubko is also going to cry. So, inspirational questions. Thank you very much.
So,
Well, I came prepared. So I can even show you the book. Thank you. So this is the book. It's Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. I will tell you that the book, well, Sheryl Sandberg herself is quite controversial right now. And the book itself is controversial because I think when it was first published several years ago, about 2014, I believe, It was very celebrated. I think there's a bit more thinking about it because it's felt that this is a book very elitist for women who have money, who have the ability to hire somebody to help with the children, to help cook meals, various other things. And I don't disagree with that she is mainly talking about women who are leaders and about women who are fortunate to have a good education and probably have some money as well. All of that said, I think that there's a lot that can be learned from this book because what it celebrates is that all of us have concerns and fears and moments when we feel that we're not up to the job, we're not up to our family life. And she talks about that very honestly. And I think it's important to be able to talk about these things honestly. Many of the examples that she gives, I recognized. I'd had that experience myself. And I found it very reaffirming that other people have, and specifically women, have these challenges. And, her ideas about how to address those challenges. And also that, one of the issues I think women face is, can you have it all? I mean, can you have this amazing, brilliant career? Can you be a model fashion plate? Can you have a family and many children who are well-adjusted and not missing you because you're at work? I mean, this is something that women really struggle with. Maybe men do as well, but I think mostly not as much as women do. And so she talks about that as well. And again, I think it's important to be able to talk about these things honestly. Every solution, or I don't want to say that she has solutions, but her ideas are going to work for some people, maybe not for others. And I think she is probably a little bit optimistic that you can have it all the time. I think most of us think that maybe it's more realistic that you have it all, but maybe not all at once. But again, these are discussions, and while I think many of us face many of these issues, nobody's path in life is exactly the same, but it's just useful to be able to read one person's view on this, and so I would recommend the book. So thanks for that question.
Anybody else want?
Yes, thank you. I just first wanted to very, very quickly address the first question also, because at least to me it seems that many of the things that have been said in this panel, for example, could be also used in such a debate. I guess if there are so many good examples here of good effects of okay, let's call it equality of opportunities for all, or gender equality, then it can't be all bad. So maybe that's something we could also systematize and have some good examples. I think there are many from many different kinds of countries, and I think that in itself is quite a good argument. So regarding inspirational, so I already started to talk about Astrid Lindgren, so I will continue. To talk about Astrid Lindgren, because I think, of course, her books in themselves, I think, are very inspirational, but I think it's also, I'm not sure it's translated so much, but her life is also, I think, and the struggle she had in her life is also very inspirational, and there are a lot of important questions, a lot of important answers that she found. She was born in 1907, and when she was 19 years old, she had a son out of wedlock. She was not married, and this was so shameful in Sweden at the time. So she had the baby in secret in Copenhagen, and this baby was raised by foster parents for 4 years before she got the courage to bring him back to Sweden and to be a mother. And I think this and many other experiences are clearly part of what shaped her and what shaped her as an author. And I think what is also really shines through in her literature, but not in a didactic way. She's never didactic, I would say. So it just tells a very good story, and from the story you, both as a grown-up, I think, and as a child, you learn something. So that would be my recommendation. Maybe we should try to get it translated into Ukrainian. Thank you.
If I may comment on that, our translator, Olga Senyuk, she's recognized in the world as the best translator of Astrid Lindgren. So it's all translated, and thanks to her books, I have learned to read, because my parents refused to read me every day books about Carlson. Seriously, they refused. So, and she's alive, and she's excellent, and excellent woman, by the way. And there is a movie now about Astrid Lindgren on our, so it's also something. Sorry. Okay. Yes, absolutely.
I wanted also to pick up on the first question. I touched a bit when I spoke about this, about religion, conservatism, and not what we say, woman empowerment. No, it's what Judith said, equality of chances. We cannot miss 50% or more of the population out of everything. That's impossible. It's not anymore the way of life. It maybe have been in the 18th century, not even in the 19th century. Why? Because in the 19th century, women had started to work when there was this industrial revolution. And now you are here on the brink of societal revolution, a change. And the change that you need after your two revolutions and your independence is a change, I would not say against family values, not at all. It's just a chance for you, women, and for men to be equal, to share a life, and also to be part of the society at local level. Most important also at local level. Why at local level? Because it's the local level that you can change a country. And I'm a Catholic. I go to church. Sylvia also. And we are maybe more upfront as her. I've been in many reflections groups in the church. And we never found anything wrong about this possibility for equal chances. And you may have heard of Antonio Guterres. He is the SecGen of the United Nations. He's a Portuguese. He's the most Catholic man you can find. But he's so open, so broad, and he's trying also to change the mentality in the United Nations. And I think you need to say to anyone who says we cannot go to these different types of societies. No. We are not saying that. We are saying equality of chances for everybody.
Sorry, only following this question you posed. I mean, I think as Judith said, that there's a problem of language also. I mean, the gender term or gender policy has become so broad, and in some countries and in some parts of countries so divisive that it's good to clarify what you are fighting for. I mean, and of course, the important thing, I think that's what, I mean, is to take out all barriers, legal and of mentality, so that women can enjoy the same rights and obligations also as men. from a law perspective. I mean, and also within the families, in society, etc., and of course in politics. So what would be a pity and even ironic is that this fight, or this, which is not only legitimate, but morally, even if I can mention morals here, compulsory for you to make to the next generation. I mean, I'm not talking here about a fight between women and men or against men. That's not the point. The point is that women, as men, as human beings, deserve to have the same rights and obligations according to the law. I mean, that's a principle of a rule of law country, and therefore a principle of a European country based on these values, and a country which aspires to join NATO and the European Union. So it's not a question of destroying family values. I mean, even in the European Union, family law is left to the single countries. So there's not a question that the EU would force any EU member country to follow a model of family. Each country decides by the votes of their population, who choose governments or local councils or whatever, who promote this kind of family values, or this kind of, so that's not a question for the EU to enter into, but it's a question for the EU to enter into if there is inequality vis-à-vis the law, if you discriminate by sex, race, etc. Of course that would be a cause for, so I think maybe also in Spain this gender issue has become like so broad that it's like the enemy to some people and the magic to others. I mean, we are talking, I think, about a different issue, which is so important that it has not to be left to certain politicians who want to destroy the future of the country in this regard. So I think that, and if there's a problem with the church, I don't know, but it's a question of talking also and identifying what the problems are. Because sometimes when mentalities are very traditional, I'm not talking out only, I mean, church or not, it doesn't matter. There's the fear behind this. So if one hear the voice gender, maybe they are afraid of what's going to provoke that to our society. But you are talking about having the same rights, the same obligations, and even taking, apart from the legal framework which you are trying to adopt to give women these same rights and obligations, but it's also a question of changing the mentality in the family and to educate everybody to know that if a woman wants, she's free to do and to have the profession and the contribution to society that she's ready to give. Thank you.
Yeah, okay,
that's...
I don't think that I can be more eloquent, so I'm not going to try. But I would say I think Ukraine has one word for what you're saying, what you were just expressing, and that is hedonist. I mean, this is Ukraine fought a revolution in 2014 about the idea of opportunity, that everybody should be treated equally and with dignity, and I think that's what we're talking about here.
Sorry for taking the microphone again, but we're talking an awful lot about what the state needs to provide and what needs to be in place. But I think it's also worth talking about what we women need to do for ourselves. Because I think all too often I see that women are held back through a lack of confidence. I have been guilty of this in the past, but in order to ensure that women play a full role in society, we actually all need to have the courage to step up. And I'm not sure that's always the case. I've been guilty of this. A short story, some of you know this already, but when I was first promoted to the rank of ambassador, I knew that the ambassadorship for Georgia was coming up, but I didn't think I would dare apply for it, or I could apply for it, because, hey, why? I'm a young woman. Why would I be an ambassador? So I made a telephone call to the director at the time. I wanted to talk to him about something really boring. It was a spreadsheet that nobody will ever remember what it was about. But there was some spreadsheet I needed an answer on. He said, Judith, it's great you're calling. You're interested in the job in Tbilisi. That's fabulous news. I am. Oh, yes, I am. Had he not said that to me, I don't think I would have had the courage to put myself forwards. So I think there's a challenge for us all, and it's coming back to Masha's point about leaning in. We need to have the confidence and the courage to lean in. Looking around this room, we have many, many role models for Ukraine. It's really important to have role models. A number of my personal role models are sat in this room. I won't say who you are. But that's really important, because if younger women can see other women succeeding, that gives permission to put yourself forwards. There is a fabulous quote from Madeleine Albright that there is a special place in hell for women who do not help other women. I hope that's true. But the point is, we also, those of us who have succeeded, have a responsibility to help others. That's why the French, the British, and the American Embassy have set up a series of events to help women mentor other women, and are looking at further work in terms of how we encourage more support from within. You don't need support from us. You've got it already within. So I just wanted to put the other side of the debate, because it's always a lot about what government needs to do, but actually there's a lot that we can do for ourselves to make all of this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll continue on the topic of role models, which I also mentioned in my first intervention. I think it's so important, both in politics, in business, in leading positions in society, in families, among ambassadors also. And I think it's so important to communicate that confidence to young, aspiring, talented women, which are so many in Ukraine, and I meet so many of them in universities around when I travel in the country, and it gives me really inspiration for the future of Ukraine. And but maybe we need more than inspiration as well. We need more than maybe we at least in a transitional period, maybe we need some more forceful measures, like now in Norway, and at least in Norway, maybe in Sweden as well. We have had gender quotas in different positions, and at a certain point of time of the development of society, this is maybe useful in politics, for instance, like 40% of each gender on party lists, which is now mandatory in all Norwegian parties except one. Legislation to promote and support equalities, family policy. So we are very happy to work with both the government and Verkhovna Rada in supporting Ukrainian policies in this area, and it takes time, of course, but we will continue supporting it. Political leadership is important, and
And to finish in Ukrainian, probably to finish my speech, I would like to say and to emphasize that the goal of Ukrainian government and Ukrainian parliament is very clear. You need to develop equal opportunities, equal gender opportunities. We support this through our projects, via our policy. Women of Ukraine. And as for your question about the movie in Norway, I would advise you to watch the film which is called Thelma. It was shown here in Kyiv in March at the cinema Kyiv, And it tells us about young girl who is growing up in a very conservative family, a very religious family. This is also the issue in Norway. And it shows that even in Norway, there is still a problem with gender equality, and we have to fight. We still have to fight for the rights. And we cannot forget that this is a long-term fight. This is a long-term process. And we have a clear goal. We should reach our goal too. And we should fight together, and we support you in your fight.
I think today we have many opportunities and much better conditions for taking initiative and be active and promote gender equality. Of course, I again refer to our history. We Lithuania and Ukraine had a difficult history in 20th century. For example, my mother was 3 years old when she was deported to Siberia, and there are many stories of Lithuanians like this. And then she returned back. She graduated from the university and made a certain career. And by the way, the best friend of her in Siberia was a Ukrainian girl. So we have always to remember those difficult times and those stories and those women who overcome those historic circumstances. And if I could recommend a book for you, there is a book published in the US by American-Lithuanian author Rūta Šepetys. The title is Between the Shades of Grey. It also tells about the story of a small girl who went through all the totalitarian difficulties of the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we still have a really long journey to go. But thank you so much for sharing your experience, sharing your life stories, sharing your advices to us. For us, it's a lot to do, and thank you for helping to doing it in our country, because role models is important. And this, I think that today we set up the role models for a lot of us. And thank you one more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Olesa. Thank you, dear speakers. Welcome you to take a photo together on this stage. Шановні гості, зараз у нас відбуватимуться дві дискусії одночасно. П'ята дискусійна платформа «He for She» – чоловіки, які підтримують жінок, відбуватиметься у цьому залі. Всіх охочих долучитися до дискусії просимо залишатися на місцях. Модеруватиме Марчин Валецький, керівник відділу демократизації бюро з демократичних інститутів і прав людини. А дискусія «Кращі практики запровадження гендерно-орієнтованого бюджетування в Україні» проходитиме у залі «Київ-1». Модеруватиме Майя Босніч, керівниця проєкту «Гендерне бюджетування в Україні», що фінансується Швецією. Просимо учасників охочих долучитися до цієї дискусії перейти у зал «Київ-1». Починаємо об 11:45 за кілька хвилин.